And we are back yet again for more Witch and the Holy Night. This looks like it's going to be an interesting chapter, Howling. I kind of have an idea of what this is going to be about, but I guess we'll see. And it could be about a certain character. But yeah, let's just get right into it. Surprisingly, there's nothing new that came up in the archive. Like, there's no... there wasn't any extra chapters or anything like that after the one we just went through. This everyday tale started like any other. And guys, this time I am using a different Switch emulator. Instead of using Yuzu like I have been using, I'm using Ryujinx instead. Hopefully that will give us less issues, because I'm sure some people noticed there was some weird... There was some weird lag and stuff happening in the videos, which I tried my best to edit out, but hopefully Ryujinx will be a much smoother experience. The morning sun alerted Sojuro that a day of work lay ahead. Specifically, the gardens needed tending to, and an unkempt garden made for an unhappy Sojuro. Luckily, today was his day off from all his part-time jobs. It was the perfect opportunity to get his hands dirty. Of course, the ladies of the house aren't going to do anything about this. Sojuro has to take care of everything. There was one problem, however. The mansion's grounds were vast. Not only had the courtyard been left to run wild, but the area around the front door had been neglected too. To tend to these problems thoroughly, he would have to work on them week in, week out. Alright, first, let's level things out. In an ideal world, his task would only take a day, but for its enormity. For the moment, Sojuro decided to set foot into the mansion's wilderness and evict the weeds. Wasting none of the early light, he started tackling the ones around the mansion. By his estimation, he could clear the forecourt, courtyard, and backyard, then take a small rest. What's gotten into him? Beats me. I doubt he's out there for fun. It was just before noon in the sunroom. Alice had come down, book in hand, to find Aoko sitting down with a fashion magazine and elegantly sipping tea. Through the window, she could see the crouched figure of Sojuro shuffling by. He's been at it all morning. Hunched over since I saw him first thing from my bedroom window. I told him to clean the incinerator too. Any objections? Not really. He always works so hard, even in the cold. Alice quietly sat down. Her teacup had been placed on the table for her. She poured herself some tea and proceeded to open her book. We'll just sit here while he does all the work. The two sat passing the time in silence. Having happened to have the same idea, a nice relaxing cup of tea in the sunroom. With their evening roles decided, there was no need for idle chatter. Aoko stared out the window, intermittently turning her gaze to her magazine. Alice was immersed in a book on rune magecraft, occasionally tilting her head up as if to recall something. As if by unspoken agreement, in unison they pressed their teacups to their lips and glanced outside. To the two girls, Sojuro appeared as if he were an animal in a zoo. Neither was interested in lending a hand. Well, of course not. Despite his sluggish movement, he was making good progress. As Aoko's attention turned back to the sunroom, her eyes met Alice's. Alice returned her gaze to her book, though moments later she raised her head again. Oh my god, he's pretty quick about all this. Holy crap. Wow. Oh my god. I'm surprised the emulator can keep up with his movements. It's not like crashing it. Clearing her throat, she attempted to focus on reading. It was no surprise that Alice admired Sojuro's diligence. Not even 30 minutes had passed before he had cleared the courtyard of its unsightly weeds. Without stopping once, the mysterious gardener left the courtyard, puffing clouds of white breath. The area he left behind was spotless. Has he done this before? Alice muttered after scanning over his work. A stalwart Sojuro worked confidently and ceaselessly. She was impressed, like she was watching a scene from a great movie, but before long she grew irked. Why would he waste his energy like that, she thought. I wonder if that's a typo there. I feel like they meant to say Aoko muttered that, and not Alice. I'm definitely seeing some errors here and there with this translation. Like I said before, definitely not the best translation from what I'm seeing. And it's kind of sad because this is supposed to be an official translation. Alice looked at the clock. If he starts now, it'll be evening before he's done with the incinerator. Actually, he already took care of it. I watched him do it from upstairs. I didn't want him breaking it, so I gave him some pointers. Well, let's just hope he actually does it correctly and doesn't mess something up, knowing him. You know, I yelled at him for so long from my window, my room almost froze over. It was safe to assume Aoko had come to the sunroom to escape her cold room. Between barking orders from a window and cleaning in the cold, it was clear who had the harder job. Did Shizuki have anything to say? Yeah, a lot, but I couldn't really hear him. In other words, his complaints fell on deaf ears. As always. With nothing else to discuss, the two resumed their reading. The ever so tense silence was broken by Sojuro entering the house after finishing his cleaning. He stared at the two of them, displeased. Warm enough in here, Aozaki? Warmer than outside, unless you're walking the halls. What made you decide to take care of the gardens anyway? Sojuro's subtle jibe had failed to find its target. He had no chance of winning, and so he just hung his shoulders in defeat. It's so cold out today, snow's probably going to fall tomorrow, so I thought I should tidy up while I could. I didn't think I'd have to work on the incinerator too. He sounded resentful, but his problem was not with the additional work. If anything, he was glad to do it. What he did not care for was how nobody had even bothered to lend a hand. He does thankless work. They're not appreciative of anything, really. It's like, yeah, you take care of everything. You're just a slave. So what? We all need to use it. Hey, seeing as you're in a generous mood, vacuum the upstairs corridor, will you? Yeah, let's give you more tasks to do. Oh, and that brace for the beech tree out back is on its last legs. Put that toolbox in your room in the attic to good use. And once you're done with that, come to my room. I have a bunch of things I'd like you to throw in the incinerator. Oh, is there anything else, ma'am? Is that all? Hence why she made him clean the incinerator. Cruel but clever. I'm starting to understand what Nasu meant when he said Aoko would be a terrible girlfriend. she's just not a really nice and caring person when you really think about it. She's just kind of I guess like not really empathetic is the right word. Maybe in some moments she can be, but it seems like she just kind of passes all this work off onto Sojuro. I mean, she does it because she knows he can do it, but at the same time, it's like she's not even willing to give him a hand. It's like, yeah, we're just gonna overwork you. And what are you going to do while I'm doing all that? No plans really. Maybe I'll play a little guitar. That'll be interesting. We haven't seen her do that. We have seen the guitar in her room, but we haven't actually seen her play it. Aoko thought hard about how to spend her afternoon. Yet the thought of cleaning did not cross her mind, as had always been the case. I'm sure she's just used to other people doing everything for her. No, it was not out of spite that she did not think to help clean. It was because the word cleaning was not in her vocabulary. So, if she was just living in her own place and she had nobody to help her out, she'd probably be like some kind of a hoarder, or she'd just be living in, I mean, everything would just, there'd be piles of trash everywhere, I'm assuming. She wouldn't throw anything away, or she just wouldn't, she'd be too lazy to do anything about it. Sojuro knew exactly why the mansion was in the state it was in. Okay, that's weird. There was like a sentence break there. What was that about? Still, that did not change the fact that the corridor upstairs was very long. Well, pretty much every corridor in the mansion is probably like that. And Aoko was not lying about how cold it was inside. Not much different from the outside. You really have no intention of helping me, do you? I mean, I do enjoy cleaning, but I don't know. Don't you even feel a little bit guilty using a roommate like this? Or do you just not feel guilt at all? That is a really good question. As usual, he might have gone too far. I don't think so. His remarks had hit too close to home. Aoko closed her magazine and turned to face him. Infuriated, she glared, her sharp blue eyes piercing into him. Sojuro knew he had not said anything unjust, but he always backed down first. Sojuro, let me explain it one more time. Okay. He replied automatically, straightening his back in response to Aoko's cold, calm tone. Don't be mistaken. We're not letting you stay here out of kindness. We're putting up with you because we have to. Aoko did not mince her words. Sojuro nodded in defeat. So, I'm basically a pet. That's like the nice way of putting it. Exactly. And not a very useful one at that. Oof. Yeah, that would kind of piss me off. I'm like, okay, after everything I did, you're going to say that? Really? Aoko responded, already tired of the conversation. While Sojuro had little room to counter, he still tried. Last time I checked, most pets don't have to buy food or pay rent. Did you say something? Nothing. I'm just a dumb mutt barking up the wrong tree. He raised his hand dismissively, knowing he could not win. To Aoko's ears, his attempt at self-deprecation sounded facetious. You do understand the position you're in, right? Yeah, when will I do all the work? Aoko grinned at her pet's obedience. As long as he knew his place, that was all that mattered to her. She seemed to be extremely satisfied with his response. Huh, you don't have a care in the world, do you? What's going on? Her playful smile darkened, as did Sojuro's expression. Oh god, is she using like force choke on him? Ozaki, I can't breathe. You know, if you keep this up, you'll never be able to complain again. Shall we give it a try? He shook his head, his expression growing more and more grim. Smart choice. I don't want to see you suffocate, if I can help it. The grating sound subsided. Sojuro gingerly touched his throat. The collar that had suddenly tightened around his neck returned to its normal size. Oh, that's right. They do have that collar on him. I guess they could just like remotely control it with magic. Do you have any idea how painful it is to suffocate? It's excruciating. I told you that's what your collar was for. You're always so naive, so I took the opportunity to give it a test run. Now you know your place. Anyway, chores. You're wasting daylight. Okay. So that's what the sun was trying to tell me this morning. Sojuro left the sunroom, his shoulders slumped and his tail between his legs. Aoko watched him leave before turning to her magazine as if nothing had happened. Alice paid no attention. None of that had anything to do with her. With Sojuro gone, the room once again fell silent. As the clock ticked on, Alice suddenly stopped flipping through her book. Any reason why you push him so hard? She asked as though talking to herself. Aoko replied without so much as looking up. Nope, we're just going to erase his memories in the end anyway. Why get his hopes up? Obscure as ever, but sincere in her own way. When you put it like that, I suppose you are right. Alice could not believe she had forgotten about the situation. Silently, she looked up from her book and gazed outside once again. The courtyard through the window reminded her of where she lived a decade ago. Nothing could compare to the beauty of those gardens. But if that was the case, why did the scenery make her feel so nostalgic? It reminds me of my home in jolly old England. All Sojuro had done was take care of the gardens with the goodness of his own heart. In only half a day, he had achieved so much. Maybe Alice will actually thank him for what he does. It was Christmas Eve, and snow had started to fall. Uh-oh. So are we getting near the end in that case, if it's Christmas Eve already? It is called Witch on the Holy Night. Its timing was too good, as though it had waited for that day specifically. The cold, bustling main street seemed bright and vibrant under the layer of frosty white. Reindeer statues illuminated the surroundings. Children danced merrily to jingle bells. People walked along the brick road, smiling broadly. These festivities, however, had not reached the mansion on the hill. Silence enveloped the isolated building. The shadow of the snow-covered woodland grew longer, beckoning in the darkness. People returned to the warmth of their homes, knowing a bitter night lay ahead. Something had been amiss in the mansion all day. Perhaps it was the calm before the storm. 2 days had passed since Touko Aozaki had revealed herself. Aoko and Alice spent more and more time locked in their rooms. Mealtimes had grown noticeably quieter. With their roles decided, they were too busy with their own jobs to worry about each other. On this day, the two had been relaxing in the drawing room since morning. The mood was calm. Well, mostly at least. Sojuro was fretting that tonight would be the same. The snow just couldn't wait till tomorrow, could it? He aimed his words toward the girls on the sofa, despite knowing they would be ignored. Whether the snow fell today, tomorrow, or not at all, it did not affect them. The snow just meant a white Christmas. Aoko remained silent. She wasn't ignoring him per se, she just had other things on her mind. Sojuro knew this, but still cast a lonely glance around the sunroom. The courtyard he had cleaned only a few days ago was hidden by a layer of white. The falling snow would stop every so often, but then resume again as if teasing Sojuro. By the next morning, the courtyard would be a winter wonderland. Aoko and Alice sipped tea in an effort to fight the cold. In fact, that was all they were doing. You know, Touko's hair was darker than yours, Aozaki. I've never seen such beautiful red hair. Shame it was so short. Sojuro rambled on, not expecting a response. However, her hair was cut short? Aoko's expression went from nonchalant to its usual sharpness. What do you mean short? You are talking about her hair, right? Yeah, even shorter than Alice's. Is that a big deal? No, she just used to have longer hair than mine. That's hard to believe. I mean, we kind of have seen her with long hair, but there's not a lot of illustrations with her like that. So she really cut it all off. Aoko spoke in a grave tone. Showing slight interest, Alice turned to Sojuro. What's so bad about her getting a haircut? Does it affect you in any way, Aozaki? Well, yeah, it does. As we have nothing to do until nightfall, I suppose I'll explain. You're lucky. If you hadn't said anything, we'd have been oblivious when fighting her. Aoko knowingly glanced at Alice, her expression suggesting she was treating her. She was also likely seeking approval. Alice remained stoic as ever, her expression showing neither approval nor disapproval. How can I put this? Mages can use their hair as a weapon. For the longest time, hair and eyes have been vital to magecraft, especially in my sister's case. The more colorful the eyes, the better. The longer the hair, the higher the quality. Hair has the same qualities as the body, and when grown over many years, it becomes a strong base component. That's why I'm growing mine out. Looking after it is a pain sometimes, but I like styling it. Sojuro glanced furtively at Alice, wondering if the same held true for her. Maybe Alice had cut it because it was a hassle to maintain. It sounded stupid, but then again, this was Alice. Sojuro nodded to himself. So that's good for you then, right, Aozaki? I mean that Touko's got short hair. If she's used all her hair before coming here, then yes. Long hair can be used in tons of ways. I can only use it to temporarily reinforce magecraft, but my sister can use it to complement longer-lasting spells. With all those thoughts and memories in that hair, it's like having a mage clone. You can even use it on a dead dog or cat, reviving them and making them the mage's familiar. That's pretty creepy. Familiars with no previous magical energy, like said dog or cat, can acquire magic circuits, all thanks to the hair. The reanimated creature becomes something entirely different. They can even speak and take human form. Their behavior changes too, to something resembling a regular mage. Right, Alice? Her last words came with a mocking smile. Alice silently ignored it. So, Touko has familiars like Alice. I think that's a safe bet. She must have been growing her hair for over 20 years. She could have an army of powerful familiars. Well, she does have those creepy dolls, or the automata, or whatever the hell they're called. The fight at the amusement park. Just the thought of Alice Koonji releasing flat snarks sent a shiver down Sojuro's spine. The oil of the moon had been a unique familiar out of this world. Hey, don't worry about it. She couldn't create a familiar that could destroy Misaki or anything. Don't jinx it. Don't say that. Still, a familiar created with hair that long would be incredibly powerful. Mages that use their hair, though, they need to reset one of the 3 pillars from the beginning. They have to grow their hair again. Making familiars is easy, but not leading them. As Aoko spoke, her mood visibly improved, as though she had made a breakthrough. Dogs and cats. Tilting his head to the side, he could not imagine a world where dogs and cats were so powerful. It's strange. Touko is a puppet master. I wonder why she would lower herself to make familiars. She probably has nothing to help her, and she wouldn't ask for assistance with a personal matter concerning the family. Actually, maybe the puppet at the amusement park wasn't made from her hair. Now that you mention it, you did say that it seemed highly customized. Its curse-based perpetual motion coiled arms, fin shot, and the depths of its obsession. It's likely Touko created the puppet from scratch. Meaning? Touko's not the type to put herself into her creations. She might consider doing it for a perfect replica, but the ones we destroyed weren't even faint copies of her. Aoko, did that puppet have the same power as Touko? No way, not even close. Then it would not have been made using her hair. Meaning we have to keep our eyes open for a familiar fused with her magical energy. So in your expert opinion, you think that her familiar could be stronger than my sister herself? If it's not, then what's the point of creating one? She needs help. It's 2 of us versus 1 of her. So she's going to attack with the familiar at the same time. That makes sense. It would at least be a fair fight. Well, fairer. When it comes to familiars, I think you have the upper hand. Alice had never been defeated by a familiar. She sighed at Aoko's overconfidence. Aoko, even if she utilizes her 20-year stockpile, she can only use small animals as vessels. If Touko was to prepare a familiar as her trump card... Don't you say it. No sister of mine would stoop that low. Aoko and Alice stared at each other. The conversation had returned to the drawing room, but the subject matter was not for the faint of heart. I suppose. Still, nothing hunts down a human better than a human. Touko may not have raised the dead, but she probably has something just as powerful up her sleeve. Yeah, okay, I admit, geniuses can get stuck in their own world sometimes. Whatever corpse she throws at me, I'll be ready. Aoko nodded reluctantly at Alice's directness. Needless to say, Sojuro was completely lost. Yeah, I'm right there with him. I don't quite follow. Why are you both convinced the familiar is dead? Because living partners aren't familiars, they're co-conspirators. Familiars can't live with a mage to sustain them. Still, they're the perfect foil, strong-willed, and smart enough to compensate for their mage's shortcomings. Everything you'd want from a great familiar. Let's be real, who wouldn't want to bring that kind of partner back to life? Completely obedient and capable of compensating for their mage's weakness, Sojuro felt that a familiar was a little different from himself. Now then, my sister has always been a rune user, so we can somewhat predict her tactics. Her trump card, which we need to be worried about, is probably a familiar. And it's likely she used up all of her automata already. Aoko spoke directly to Alice, looking for confirmation. Alice nodded in agreement. So we stick to the plan. Let's call it a night. I'm gonna make her pay for all the crap she's put us through for the last month. Aoko clenched her teeth and balled her fists. It all seemed like nothing more than sibling rivalry. In fact, that's probably all it was. Looking at Aoko, Sojuro let out a sigh of relief. With what happened with Touko, and how they reacted to her visit, the atmosphere had been deathly tense. For now, though, Aoko seemed much calmer. Even though she's angry, he took comfort in the thought that perhaps the sisters would just bury the hatchet. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Even if Aoko and Touko were not sisters, he would not want to see what would happen if they fought. The hands of the clock turned gently. Approaching Judgment Night, a merciless silence would soon come to mock Sojuro's complacency. Yeah, so far this is definitely a much smoother experience than it was on Yuzu. No lag or anything like that, so I think we're good. I think we'll probably continue to use this emulator instead. As night appeared, 2 things vanished. The first was the whimsical snowfall. The second was the lights of the mansion on the top of the hill. Aoko and Alice were nowhere to be seen inside. Only Sojuro remained. It was the night of Christmas Eve. Though Aoko and Alice had yet to find Touko, they knew everything would be concluded over the course of this day and the next. Christmas comes but once a year. It was a singular time for endings and new beginnings. In Japan, the modern holiday dated back only about 100 years, and celebrated Christ's birth only in name, with all its latter-day trappings. It was neither a pure homage nor corruption of the festival that inspired it. Regardless, there was a significant increase in the land's mana during festivals. Such charge distortions were a boon to a mage's craft, be it creative or destructive. Touko Aozaki sought to destroy the local sigils, which gathered and properly cycled the magical energy of the land and its people. Sojuro was able to gather that much from Aoko and Alice's conversation. Touko had already claimed 3 sigils. Only 2 remained. Any further loss would signal Aoko and Alice's defeat. In order to protect the remaining ones, they had to split up. Aoko lacked power, so she would need to borrow a ploy from Alice and head to the Tokawa sigil, which boasted the greatest local energy supply. Alice would go fully equipped to the sigil in Yashirogi. Free from the constraints of civilized society, magecraft is most powerful at midnight. The young witch and the apprentice mage wished each other luck before leaving the mansion. It was almost 10 at night. After the girls set out, the first 2 hours passed quickly. When Aoko was ready to head off, Sojuro walked with her to the foyer. Neither had spoken a word to each other. She had departed without showing any sign of fear. It was difficult to tell whether she did not want to get him involved, or whether she did not see him as a worthy ally in combat. The thought stuck with him. He let out a long sigh, not out of dejection or frustration. It was a mechanical, emotionless breath. He sat on the near-frozen floor, staring vacantly up at the skylight. Moonlight peeked through the clouds. He imagined the moonlight bouncing off the town's powdery blanket and illuminating the night. But he would not find himself downtown. Watching from the sidelines was his role to begin with. His roommates and he lived worlds apart. He could not keep up with them, and if he did not show the same kind of will, he would remain on the sidelines. However, I get it. I'm not needed anymore. Sojuro looked up at the moon. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a trickle of sadness. Well, tonight's the night, I guess. Maybe tonight's the night where the wolf comes out, hence the name Howling. Veiled in white and cloaked in darkness, the park seemed like a forgotten memory. Not a soul was in sight. The night felt far more enigmatic than usual, and the air was clean enough to drink. Though only a sliver of moonlight peered through the clouds, it lit up the entire world. In those moments, a young girl's footsteps echoed, trampling the still white silence under a midnight sun. The pale moon illuminated the inky blue sky. Only a few streetlights and an incongruous phone booth betrayed signs of civilization. A girl appeared, dressed in black. Against the snowy landscape, the figure of Alice Koonji was unmistakable. Pure black, deeper than even the night, were her overcoat, gloves, and hat, even her hair and eyes. Nothing stirred for a time. Not Alice, nor the white scenery. The world was a still painting of a snowy field. Only time moved, gradually darkening the lights in the park, and eventually the nearby homes as well. Yashirogi was a more modern and developed town than Misaki. Though the park was located in the center of town, it had become a blind spot. It had been overlooked by developers and carried no commercial value. A few houses encircled the park, the streetlights turned off at midnight. It was a white night. People, even machines, were fast asleep. It looks like I got here early, Alice whispered, watching the streetlights slowly fade. She thought she heard a dog howling in the distance. That's creepy. Perhaps it was howling at the moon. The howl reached deeper into the night than expected. A wolf, maybe? The phone rang. It was perhaps the first time it had rung since Sojuro moved into the mansion. Hesitantly, he picked up the receiver and brought it to his ear. He heard nothing. He felt he had to say something, but could not think what. Maybe something like, "Hello, Koonji residence?" Or maybe, "You reached the Aozaki residence?" While he was deep in thought, a voice as light as air came through the receiver. "Shizuki?" Sojuro could barely hear the voice, but it was definitely Alice's. "Yes. Is that you, Alice?" No response. The silence was as profound as the night, but for the sound of static from the receiver. After a long pause, Alice finally spoke. "Is Aoko there?" "No, she hasn't come back yet." "I see." With a click, the call ended. Sojuro wondered if she had something to say, but could not respond in time. Yeah, this is turning into a horror movie. There's a creepy-ass howl from somewhere, and then Alice just called without saying anything. Okay, what the hell is this? Slowly they advanced, carving through the fresh snow. There were so many. Where had they all come from? Dozens of feral dogs snarled at Alice, their eyes trained on her. The snow clung to the beast's mangy fur. Their clenched fangs and bloodshot eyes hid a barely reined hunger that might burst forth like lightning at any moment. They yearned to taste her warm flesh and satiate their empty bellies. To them, the girl in black stood like a lighthouse in a stormy sea. She watched them, disinterested. It appeared that the Yashirogi sigil was the key target tonight, not Touko where Aoko had gone. Alice had always been unflappable, and the child's play before her was hardly about to change that. Her main enemy was not the dogs surrounding her, but the lone mage behind them, Touko Aozaki. What hideous taste. Is this what you've fallen to after these last several years? Not that I'm complaining. If this is who you really are, then Aozaki and I have nothing to worry about. Touko laughed at the acerbic taunt. My, such immovable spirit. Rest assured, Alice, I'm not doing this for fun. Crunching through the fallen snow, Touko slowly came into view. She wore a moss-green coat that contrasted sharply with Alice's garb. A silk scarf warmed her neck. She stood tall, her hair short, striking a more valiant posture than any young man. After all, the two standing here needed to be less like the shining moon, and more like the darkness surrounding it. The barking abated. Like servants in a royal court, they averted their eyes from their ruler, lest their eyes and hearts be plucked out. It's been too long, Alice. It has. You look well, Touko. They stood about 12 feet apart. No love had been lost between them. Just two enemies, one who was to be victorious and one who was to fall. So, shall we do this, Alice? We have so much to catch up on. How have you been? There's so much I've been dying to tell you. You can spare 5 minutes to chat, can't you? I'm afraid not. If I give you even the slightest quarter, you will steal it all. The following events unfolded quickly. Boldly and without a second's thought, Alice pulled out a cat's bell from the seam of her mantle and dropped it. Diddle diddle. The beginning of Alice Koonji's magecraft, the start to a night of fairy tales. Aoko favored a quick draw approach, like something from a western. However, Alice preferred sleight of hand. She used her target's blind spots against them, ending the game before they knew it had begun. The bell fell, like a coin into a fountain. Then, as it was about to strike the ground, it shattered, disappearing without a trace. Runes. Correct. I spent the day carving characters into the park. The brick path meant it was easy work, if a little time-consuming. Look at the woods around here, roughly a 1,200 square foot blank canvas. Impressive, isn't it? Right now, you and I are right on top of 300,000 characters worth of runes. Yeah, if you guys remember from Kara no Kyokai, Touko did like to mainly use runes. Swallowing hard, Alice took a step back. Touko had carved runes all over the ground. Even in the area Diddle reacted to alone, there was a depressing amount of them. Had she truly carved them into the whole park? Alice did not react with surprise. She simply narrowed her eyes. She could see how it would have taken the whole day. It was no wonder Diddle Diddle, Banquet of the Night, was destroyed by the skin of sun. Still, something bothered Alice. How in the world did you hide them all? There were just so many. What kind of magecraft could do that?
Oh, these are special. These runes shift location. They're doing it even now. They look like simple scratches, but they return to their original form when they touch strong magical energy. You could call them memory runes. No matter how deep the night, these little suns won't set, and the snow hid them beautifully. She spoke modestly, but Alice could not imagine the amount of persistence, technique, and skill it must have taken. And it only took a day. Even 10 mages would have trouble producing so many sophisticated runes in that time. Moreover, these runes were made using unknown techniques the Association had not approved. It pains me to admit it, Touko, but that's a lot of power to use on one poor little girl. Oh, please, I've never thought that about you. Though, there were times when I admired that body of yours. To have one like that.
Okay, what's that supposed to mean? Oh god. It happened in the blink of an eye. Alice cut off Touko's snide remark with a deadly stare. The left eye of the darkly clad girl changed in color to an ominous ruby. The speed of that incantation was phenomenal. Alice's mystic eyes of enthralling snared Touko. She had been the one to quite literally be taken captive by the girl's snare. Touko tried to raise her arm, but could not even move a finger. Alice's mystic eyes commanded absolute control, with no room for resistance. Only a person's internal organs were allowed the freedom to move. Since their organs still functioned, it was more precise to say her eyes forbid the target from acting. Alice had played her hand with exquisite timing. It wasn't the speed of her eyes that had given her an edge. The deftness with which she wove her spells to exploit the briefest vulnerability is what made Alice a different caliber to other mages like Aoko. This witch, who lived hidden in the modern era, was more seasoned in magical battles than Touko Aozaki. Such a shame. Without diddle-diddle, your eyes can't be made acrostic. You were close. With your moon ploy kickshaw, I might have been begging for mercy. The formation holding Touko began to distort. In the blink of an eye, the mage had bested Alice's mystic eyes. Alice's black outfit fluttered in the wind. She turned so that she was not facing Touko head-on. The mage had recovered through her own mystic eyes. At the root of Touko's mystic eyes was a spell of mesmerize. Most effective when facing their prey, such eyes could mind-jack a target's awareness. It was difficult to resist head-on. However, its effect was greatly diminished if the target was not facing the eyes directly, even if it was within range. Moreover, the girl was the last witch of her lineage, who commanded a great number of fairy tales. Against mystic eyes that projected their effects, simply turning one's body was enough to repel half of the magical energy. Like Alice's eyes, Touko's could also disable actions. Alice had escaped by the skin of her teeth. The damage she'd suffered was the weight of a twig to a forest. She just had to let the energy pass through. In an instant, a startling chill ran through Alice's body. Oh god, this was a problem. The touch of death ran up her spine. She glared at the mage before her as blue rubber balls flowed out from beneath her overcoat. The stare-off grew more intense. Alice glared harder, resisting Touko's mystic eyes with her own. Losing was not an option. In terms of raw magical energy, Alice Koonji's mystic eyes were more powerful and advanced than Touko's. Surely nobody could beat her. And yet, her unfiltered stock of magical energy, stifled by old-fashioned values, was no match for Touko's madness. Deeper within her eyes, somehow, the eyes revealed a sealed power. Jesus Christ. Inside the crystalline lens of the mage's left iris was a bottomless pit, a Klein cube. Alice winced in pain. The bindings grew in number. So many mystic eyes, thousands perhaps, and all fixed on Alice. Pressure, so much pressure. Endless, and Alice knew it. She saw, incredulously, she saw eyes growing within eyes. Touko had placed opposing mirrors inside her eyes, resulting in an infinite glare.
It was the act of a madwoman, creating mystic eyes within mystic eyes. Jesus Christ, that sounds terrifying. She could even control the resulting chaos caused by all the copies. Her insanity knew no bounds. No mage in their right mind would mass-produce so many mystics, the last escape of humankind, so indiscriminately. Oh dear, am I making you uncomfortable? Tell me, am I doing a good job of imitating a mindster? Aren't you impressed? Instead of bending reality using a rare mystic like you would, I mass-produce a mystic to bend reality to my will. On the surface, they're regular mystic eyes, only their volume is infinite. No matter how much magical energy an opponent uses to resist them, they will simply multiply the energy needed to bind them. God, how do you win against her? She wielded power without limit to disable an opponent. Once one was caught in them, one was chained to the concept of infinity. Projection-type eyes had a fatal flaw. Their firepower and formula were insignificant compared to the great artillery of incanted spells, but Touko had torn down that conventional wisdom with brute strength. If the gun was a pea shooter, she simply needed to bring more guns. A 9mm bullet could never destroy a fortress, unless one threw a fortress's massive bullets at it. The principle was brutishly simple, but in the world of magecraft, where concepts decided supremacy, Touko had created the perfect weapon. The target would be bound until she closed her eyes. In theory, at least, the effects were infinite. No amount of magical energy could ever overcome it, so it was utterly futile to resist using magical energy. So she's basically using, she's like, I'll just use more. I'll just use quantity, as my weapon. Of course, one way to counter it would be to stay out of Touko's line of sight to begin with. The standard tactic against Mystic Eyes was to defeat the user before they were aware of you. There was, however, another way. It was simpler than one might think. I'm afraid this is checkmate. Any last words? Alice could no longer see her enemy. Touko's infinite eyes had bound her. All she could make out was a sliver of moonlight, and a blue streak tracing its way towards her. Fine, I wish I could say I had no regrets like you. She drew a rune in the air, unleashing a shockwave to tear flesh asunder. The gusts became blades of air that shredded Alice's overcoat and minced. Blue feathers flitted all around. Touko felt something behind her and turned. 5 cat-shaped bells were thrown at her feet. And just as quickly as they shattered to pieces, standing before her was a completely unharmed Alice Koonji. The rune was but a light breeze. Have you really lost your touch, Touko? You used it double? I've never heard of a ploy that can take the form of a mage. That was an interesting trick. Well, you have now. He's useless every other day of the year, but comes in handy when someone's trying to kill you. Oh, that must be the bird, or the robin. Yeah. As if responding to Alice's words, a bird began chirping frantically. An anonymous sacrifice. Who killed Cock Robin echoed into the night, sung out of tune. That old rhyme. But you can only kill it once. Not that it would matter if it was more than that. The bird squawked the very unbird-like death throw. Oof. Well, there goes the bird. There goes our favorite character. From behind Alice, the blue robin fell from its tree, a victim of Touko's mystic eyes. So useless. How about you and I start over? Or rather, let's end this now. You're out of options in this park. I don't think so. Granted, I may not be able to break free of your eyes. But...
Okay. Sung in English, the song came from the depths of the earth, stirring a mighty quake to mark the birth of something gargantuan. Touko needed to throw Alice into an infinite hell before whatever that was could be completed. But she was far too late. Oh my god. Is she summoning a giant colossus? The ground burst to life.
A finger, then another, and another, all rising up like towers. Earth, snow, and brick knitted together, manifesting a giant stone golem. What the hell is this? What's this freak doing here? Touko was so angry and confused she could barely gather her thoughts. The bridge giant, the monster from the Mainster's fairy tales, rose from the ground, ruining Touko's plan. The giant was extremely powerful, but could only be summoned under one condition. It must be in proximity to a natural river. That was the monster's one and only condition. But this park was nowhere near one. And on top of that, it was rising up directly between Touko and Alice, mid-battle. Oh. There's a river, all right. Well, I suppose river is a bit of an exaggeration, and it'll be gone soon. Touko lowered her gaze. She was standing in a puddle of water. The scarred red mage was dumbfounded. That was why Alice had used Diddle Diddle before. While the bells could be replenished, they were valuable to Alice. And she had spent 5, throwing them in an intentional line for the sun runes to destroy. From there, a stream of melting snow? So she created a river by melting all the snow? Oh god. Yeah, don't fuck with Alice. The arms of the Thames troll rose up from the stone paving. The monster's torso alone surpassed 80 feet. Its form was made entirely of stone. Previously, she had created one using the trees of a forest. However, Touko knew instantly that the monster before her was at least twice as powerful. Halt! My question is how is nobody around like noticing this fight happening? Like nobody hears this, nobody sees this. I guess you could say the same thing about like all the fights in Fate Stay Night. Like there's no civilians that have noticed this going on. She unleashed her stacked mystic eyes. They were meaningless at this stage. They had no effect on the giant. As said, mystic eyes can be countered in 2 ways. The first is to hide oneself from view of the mage. That was the standard response. The other way, however, was devilishly simple, yet 100% effective. In fact, it's less of a way and more of a fact. Mystic eyes curse a target by focusing on them. However, what if the target was too large to focus on entirely? The answer was, one could barely stop a single arm. The giant, unfazed, raised its right arm and swung it down onto the ground, destroying thousands of runes. The demolished stones were then absorbed into its arm, adding to its mass. As the mage had said before, no matter how deep the night, these little suns won't set. While the suns might not set, they could be crushed under the bulk of a giant's hand. The victor of the battle was decided. Touko Ozaki closed her eyes and prepared to escape. The stray dogs began to whine, fearful of the hulking figure before them. You win this one, Alice. Looks like I'm no match for a mainster after all. Let's pick this up another time, shall we? Do you really think you can escape, Touko? Oh, please, Alice. Give me some credit. I should mention, I don't think I'm the one who needs to escape. There was no hint of bravado in Touko's tone. Even in the face of a titan she'd had no means of harming, her confidence was unshakable. The reason being, the opening act's over. Come out, Bale. This was no longer a battle of skill. A fight for survival had begun. Snap went Touko's fingers. In response, a beautiful high-pitched melody floated up toward the moon. It echoed all around them. The spiral howl dredged up ancient primal memories. Its source emerged from the shadows and landed next to the mage. Oh my god. Alice's lip trembled faintly, not from fear, but with admiration, once she recognized the creature before her. It was a majestic golden beast, beyond the domain of both magical and phantasmal, simply divine. It was a life that should have passed from the world with the age of gods, a mystic derived from human wisdom, preserved by thousands of generations of hidden tradition. A recreation of a miracle that once freely walked the earth, the natural enemy of magecraft, able to crush it with ease. Quiet resignation settled over Alice's face. The golden beast charged. This time, she didn't even have a chance to admit defeat. And Touko has some dirty tricks up her sleeve. Here's a wolf I'm just going to pull out, and he's going to maul you to death. She could hear the beast's breathing in her ear. It seemed she had been unconscious for a short time. Alice opened her eyes and took a deep breath. Oh no. Each cough sent pain shooting through her body. Blood rose from the pit of her stomach, and she spat it onto the cold ground. When her vision returned, she was able to make out the distant sky, falling snow, and the golden wolf. The wolf panted. It stared at Alice, saliva dripping from its mouth onto her cheek. Razor-sharp fangs lined its jaws. Its fur was glossier than that of any animal she had ever seen. Brutal, knife-like claws protruded from its massive blood-stained paws. And yet, it did not smell like a beast. Surely, the presence of such a noble creature, a human would feel like the lesser animal. The battle between Alice and the wolf was over before it had begun. After destroying the troll, it baptized Alice with its wicked claws, giving her no chance to escape. Its sideswipe had torn into her abdomen like a sword, carving through her clothes and flesh all the way to her heart. Even so, not once did Alice make a sound. The wolf had her pinned and stared at her face. Her limbs felt ready to break at any moment. That was the situation she found herself in. Now fully conscious, Alice stared at her enemy through pained eyes. She felt no fear, only cold reality sinking in. Sensing Alice's demeanor, the wolf suddenly paused, its paw still raised. They looked into each other's eyes. "You're bleeding. Doesn't it hurt?" The wolf's voice came as a surprise, but there was no doubt it had spoken. "Or are you just fine with pain?" The wolf's voice sounded innocent, almost childlike. In complete contrast to what had happened up to that point, the wolf smiled. "Either way, you've got guts, lady." The wolf opened its mouth wide and clamped its jaws around Alice's neck. "Bail!" Touko's tone was sharper than the wolf's fangs. The wolf froze. "Miss Touko." He let go and slowly turned its head towards the voice. "Didn't I tell you not to finish her off? Are you going to make extra work for me, you mutt?" "But that's the best part." "Well, this was a washout, and that troll went down like anything else. Talk about a disappointment." The wolf backed away from Alice, as if no longer interested in his prey. To that golden beast, she was little more than an old chew toy. "Conscious again, even with all that blood loss and broken bones? You're tough. Do I have the Mainster training to thank?" Barely clinging to life, Alice stared at Touko, but not a stare of hatred and defeat, but one of disbelief. Alice simply wondered why Touko had brought such a beast. Pardon me, I should have introduced you. This is the last known werewolf on Earth, a pureblood born to an indigenous tribe in the northern European tundra. As you can see, he's a golden mystic, and it doesn't do him justice to say he merely resembles his ancestors. He didn't have a name, so I called him Beowulf. Pretty apt, right? Beowulf? Alice's face was perplexed, even though she hadn't wavered when she was disemboweled. Beowulf. The name of the heroic giant slayer from Danish legend. It came from Old English, a combination of honeybee and wild beast, a bear in other words. Kind of an incongruous name. What do you mean? It's cute. Perhaps because of the name, or because of the golden beast itself. Finding the pain, Alice struggled to read Touko. In this respect, she was worse than Alko. Incidentally, Beo called those other mutts in. Naturally, I didn't think they'd have any effect on a Mainster's daughter. For now, at least. Touko's mouth twisted into a grin. Not the warm one Sojuro saw, but the merciless smile a victor displays to a loser. The disdain in Alice's eyes turned to anger. The Golden Mystic. How could Touko have brought such a creature into the human world? Come now, it's just supply and demand. Depopulation is not just a human problem. Their old ways were unsustainable, and so I bought him for a high price. Well, more like I had to pay for the right to bring him out of his cave. As you might have guessed, I used my hair as the contract with Bayo. I like to think of it as creating an alliance with a beast instead of creating a familiar. While she was talking, Touko noticed something strange. An unusual sound. A preternatural sound that tore at the mind. A sound that should not have existed. And it was coming from the girl's open abdomen. Regenerating already? No. Wait. What's that smell? Smells like something amazing is going to happen. Curious, Beowulf moved closer, like a puppy examining a new toy. Don't look at it. Stay over there, Beo. Pull yourself together. Touko shooed the mud away with her hand. Beowulf lowered his head meekly and withdrew. I must have trained you wrong, going for a girl's belly like that. Shame on you.
As if there's any nicer way to kill somebody.
So? But how come you're allowed to look? Idiot, I'm a girl, so it's fine.
Okay, well that makes sense.
If Alko had been here, she would have blasted them away for their impudence, just as she did against Flat Snark. You know, I feel sorry for you. How could your mainster mother call herself a parent when she's neglected you so much? When, with her gloved hand, Touko ran her fingers along the wound on Alice's abdomen. A flash of pain ran through Alice's body. Alice had held in her screams, but she finally let out a long breath. She turned her face away in pain or shame. The skin here is regenerating already. So many crests on the bones, veins, even the internal organs. Having magic circuits like that from birth is a double-edged sword. They cut incantation time, which is a great boon for a mage. But the more there are, the more pain they bring. Aozakis have crests in one arm. We've got nothing on you, do we? The magic crests Touko referred to were the inheritance of the Aozaki family, passed down by their ancestors. They can only be inherited. Alko had received the ones that were meant for Touko. However, ours has its own set of drawbacks. The pain Alko feels in her right arm is the reminder of her human body reacting to being changed into a mystic. Her mundane body rejects her right arm, and that pain is the cost of its deletion. It causes both physical and mental phantom pain, like some original sin that can never be wiped away. Still, when you've come this far, pain becomes trivial. It makes it difficult to know if you're really alive. Do you still believe you're human? Honestly, I sympathize. We've both had a hard time with such extraordinary teachers, haven't we, Alice? Touko took Alice's body in her arms. The wound from Beowulf had mostly healed. Even so, her breathing was shallow, likely due to the pain. Touko gently held the girl's face in her hands. I'm indebted to your mainster mother, and my true opponent has only ever been Alko.
Okay. That is definitely something I did not expect. Please tell me this is like CPR or something. What is this?
Alice's lungs pined for oxygen. Touko pressed her lips to hers. The young girl wriggled, trying to escape, but Touko held her firmly. Beneath the blue moon, the two remained frozen. Then, the sound of swallowing.
I'm guessing this is just some way of her trying to, I guess some kind of CPR, just trying to, I don't know, trying to save her in some way. Something solid slid down Alice's throat. Ugh. With that, she went limp and her arm fell. I guess putting something into her mouth? I mean, it's still kind of weird. Well, it's really weird. After setting Alice down on her side, Touko stood up. I've given you a dose of my own blend of Rowan. It's not easily counteracted. If you use magical energy, it'll explode, so do be careful. Oh, and don't read too much into it. Passing things with my mouth is just something I like to do. Can I volunteer?
As she desperately clung to consciousness, Alice looked up at Touko from the ground. The disgrace from the kiss was greater than the pain she felt in her body.
So she's more like angry about that than anything else.
Touko began walking away, her golden wolf in tow. Neither looked back to see Alice's hateful glare. Ah, I almost forgot. Remember those mutts Bayo called? There's a ton of them around the park, and unfortunately they're still hungry. Bayo's an alpha male. Seeing what Bayo did to you must have really fired them up. In a roundabout way, Touko had read Alice her last rites. Okay, why go to the effort of saving her if you're just gonna leave her there to get eaten? In nature, it was common for the weak that could no longer move to offer their bodies up to feed the strong. Well, Alice, I think that's everything. It's a long walk back, but hopefully you make it safely. With a twisted grin, the mage headed into the darkness. As her footsteps faded, the sound of growls grew louder. Alice could still barely focus her eyes. The hounds looked like monsters out of a picture book. Alice took a deep breath, her consciousness slipping away. The sky was blue, the trees were tall, the park was a graveyard. In the corner of her eye, though, Alice could just about make out a solitary phone booth. Oh, okay, so it all makes sense now. The phone rang. It was the second time Sojuro had heard its voice echo through the cold foyer. Only a few minutes had passed since Alice called. He wondered what she could want this time. The call persisted, determined not to leave him to his thoughts. Hello, Koonji residence. Oh, is that Sojuro I hear? A cheery voice? Sojuro had been expecting Alice. It was Touko Aozaki. Somehow, Sojuro was not surprised. Yes, it's me. How are you, Touko? He checked the time. He thought it was about midnight by now. No matter what the situation, Sojuro always kept his cool. He could hear Touko trying to suppress a laugh. After taking a while to compose herself, she started talking again. My apologies. It seems you have a penchant for catching people off guard. Anyway, to answer your question, I've been very busy today, trying to finish off everything. Huh, that's a coincidence. Aozaki was just talking about you. I thought she might. At times like this, you can tell we're sisters. In fact, that's the only thing we've ever had in common. Timing. Oh, I bet you tried to get her to stop as well. As an Aozaki, I know she didn't take to that too kindly. I wouldn't. Sojuro realized she was probably right. Aozaki's words made more sense now. Cutting to the chase, I don't have time to gossip. Is Aoko there? It almost sounded like she was worried about her sister's whereabouts. But the cool-headed Sojuro had not forgotten Touko was their enemy. Keeping Aoko and Alice in mind, he decided to be evasive. Who can say? I'm not sure what answer you expect, Miss Touko. The question shifted the tone of the conversation drastically. Sojuro could hear Touko muttering to herself in annoyance. Sojuro was proving more quick-witted than she had anticipated. A change of tack was required. I suppose not giving me an answer is probably the best course of action. On first impressions, I thought I'd be wise not to ignore you, but now I don't think I want to get you involved. So for your sake, stay out of this, okay, Sojuro? Her warning came from the heart. Sojuro responded flatly, once again not giving any sign either way. It seemed she wanted him to stay out of this too. Even Sojuro could tell the girls were being kind in their own way. But who asked for their kindness? I'll say goodbye then. I'm much busier than you think. Although there is just one tiny thing. I know this is hardly fair, but I'd never forgive myself if I didn't tell you. So I'll just have to put half of the responsibility on your shoulders. Touko giggled. A laugh to show she had him in the palm of her hand from the beginning. I met Miss Koonji a short while ago. She called you earlier, didn't she? Her tone had not changed. She sounded as cordial as before. Even so, as soon as Sojuro heard Alice's name, a chill ran up his spine. Well, right now she's in bad shape. She can barely walk, in fact. And if she uses any crests, they'll tear her to pieces. Oh, and those broken bones. Ouch. At any rate, she could lose consciousness at any time. Not great news with all those scary stray dogs around her. If you ask me, she has about 10 minutes before she's nothing but a pile of bones. She spoke as if she was telling a joke. If it was a joke, it was in bad taste. However, Sojuro knew this was anything but. She was telling the truth. He had not heard of dogs attacking anyone in town, but the noise he heard while on the phone with Alice suddenly made sense. Dogs, a pack of them, no doubt about it. They were surrounding their prey. Why had he not caught on sooner? Yeah, that's definitely a typo. Why did he not caught on sooner? Did nobody check this? Did nobody check this translation to see if it was right? Squeezing the receiver in his hand, Sojuro cursed himself. Alice had been calling for help. Yeah, I feel like they need a better, a QA team for for these translations. Even when backed into a corner, she had not wanted to involve Sojuro. Still, she needed help. The way she said his name so lightly. Where is she? He spoke abruptly. Even though he knew Touko was the enemy, he was confident she would answer him. That was the reason she called. I can tell you, but just know that the moment I do, you become my enemy. Do we have a deal? Sojuro realized what was happening. He was being tested. By ignoring Alice, he would be confirming that he did not want to get involved. But if he decided to save her, tell me, where is she? Sojuro ignored Toko's question. Of course, he was not prepared to become her enemy, but he was even less prepared to let Alice die. He had lost his ability to think sensibly. Not that he was particularly good about that to begin with. Still, he would not waste any time in deliberation. He would simply go with his instincts. It was one of the few times he had felt pride since coming down from the mountains. Okay, I'm a little disappointed. I didn't want to have to kill you. Then again, I thought it might end up this way. She's at Yashirogi Nature Park. Check the map under the phone. I bookmarked the page last time I was there. I'll say it again. You'll be lucky if you have 10 minutes. It'll be a miracle if she lasts a minute longer. As he listened, Sojuro's expression turned to one of irritation. Misaki and Yashirogi were one station apart. How long would it take to get to the station from the mansion? Usually just under 12 minutes. By the time he got off the train at Yashirogi, nearly 30 minutes would have passed. Yeah, how is he going to have any time? It looks close on the map, but transport links around here are terrible. You might be able to catch the last train, but you should cut your losses. Either way, you're my enemy now. Just don't regret your choice. The line went dead. Sojuro, not Touko, had hung up the phone. He memorized the map and then made for the door. With no time to grab his coat, he ran out into the snowy winter night with the clothes he had on. All that remained in the hall was the discarded map. It showed Misaki City. It was about 10 miles from the mansion to the nature park. 5 if you went in a straight line, but the streets were not that forgiving. 4 inches on the map, but so much farther in reality. For the first time, Sojuro cursed the town. Yeah, I don't know how he's going to get there in time. He's just going to have to run as fast as possible. Alice's injuries were not limited to her abdomen. The wolf had punched a hole straight through her back, crushing her lower vertebrae and leaving both of her legs paralyzed. Though her magic crests were repairing the damage, it would likely take another hour before recovery. At the very least, her heart and slender arms still worked. Although after crawling along the ground to the phone booth, those too were failing her. As the crests healed her wounds, a searing heat ran through her body that threatened to overwhelm her. It was as if her body was no longer her own, like she was transforming into another creature. The poison throbbing through her open wounds hurt emotionally more than physically. She was used to pain, but she could not accept this disquieting feeling. Not that she had any intention to. The moment she did, it would be her last. Alice wrestled with the discomfort from her abdomen and her magic crests. And with her consciousness holding on by a thread, she took the phone in her hand. It was unlikely Aoko would be there to pick up. Even so, with the stray dogs gathering around the booth, she had to try. It was Sojuro who picked up. Alice knew she was better off just hanging up, but his name slipped out of her mouth. After pushing and fighting with herself for some time, an image of the innocent boy came to mind, and she hung up. Her instincts had won out. She could not let him get involved. And not just because he was an innocent bystander, it was more than that. To Alice, Sojuro appeared that day because he was merely in the wrong place at the wrong time. Only the lightest of breaths passed her lips. Above her, the moon began to blur. Snow was falling again, so close yet so far. The dogs began hurling themselves at the phone booth to the chorus of hungry snarls, thunk, thunk. So she's just locked herself in the phone booth. She took one last deep breath and closed her eyes. Glass, an unusual material for a coffin. But the girl knew, in some corner of her mind, that she had made the right choice not to ask the boy for help. Some time passed. A peculiar sight came into view. A field of white flowers. The clear sky was too blue. The flowers, so numerous they made the field look barren. The sight was so dazzlingly beautiful, she wished she could look away. This was probably all thanks to Father Winter. The cold wind carried a scent of paradise far removed, untainted by man or beast. It was a glimpse of the fields beyond winter. One could be forgiven for thinking they were the afterlife. Come to think of it, she remembered how funerals were sad, yet always beautiful. She cried. She made an incongruous whine, a sound of life. Her breathing was strained and erratic. Hollow and useless was the heart that she once used to fend off pain. It was as though she was in the space between disconnected body and mind. A crying woman and a silent child. High was the sky, deep was the forest, unmoving were the people. No footsteps or voices of salvation came. Who was that looking innocently up at the sky in the stillness? And here comes Sojuro to the rescue. When she came to, Alice was going up a familiar hill. The cold night air had all but frozen her hands or feet. She shook, as you would expect from someone whose abdomen had been torn apart. Shizuki? She could barely comprehend that she was being carried slowly up Shironizuka. Sojuro had Alice on his back and was silently ascending the slope. His calm eyes seemed to be suffering from the bitter cold. He did not seem to be dressed for the time of year. Not even a coat. His exposed neck and hands were ice cold. What are you doing here? Alice asked, still slumped over his frame. She tried to move, but to no avail. The last thing she wanted was to rest her entire weight on someone else. Touko called me. She said you were in trouble. You're more stubborn than Aozaki, you know. Why didn't you ask me for help? Not that I could be much help, but still. Sojuro spoke with a scolding tone. His eyes kept firmly ahead. His words were directed at himself rather than the girl on his back. This doesn't concern you. Maybe you're right, but now it does. We'll talk more back at the house. Sojuro focused on climbing the hill. The slope would get steeper from here to the mansion. The thought of Sojuro climbing this steep hill with her on his back surprised Alice. Let me down. I'm fine. Your whole stomach is exposed. My back will keep you warm. Don't worry, you're lighter than firewood, so this is a cinch. I'm only out of breath from rushing to the park. Not that I needed to hurry in the end. Why not? As soon as I got there, the dogs ran for the hills. I'm sure Touko knew that would happen all along. It's like I said, Sojuro is surprisingly perceptive at times, even though he's very ignorant of a lot of things. She must have meant to finish you off, which means I wasn't on a time limit. I suppose I should be thankful for small mercies, Sojuro said dejectedly. But he was wrong. While Touko did not want to kill Alice per se, she would not have cared if she had died. At least that was the way Alice saw it. She did not know how long it took Sojuro to get to the park, but if he had not come, the phone booth would have collapsed and she would be dead. Alice did her best to suppress her thoughts and feelings. She felt silly at the thought of correcting him, and it would matter little anyway. The thought of her trying to thank him was more painful than her open wounds. So you carried me all the way from the park? Had to. The train stopped running. I should have gotten a taxi, but I didn't bring my wallet. Honestly, I've never felt how limiting money was until today. For the first time today, Sojuro let out a sigh. There was no point taking a break. He had already traveled close to 6 miles like this. Perhaps the fatigue was getting to him. Sojuro was more upset with his own weakness than the difficulty of the trek. Don't you mean how important money is? What I mean is, if there's something you can use only if you have money, isn't that incredibly limiting? The innocence of his question made Alice briefly forget her pain. She, too, felt distant from the real world. But compared to the boy carrying her, she felt like a regular citizen. That's just like you to say. Alice smiled to herself. As Alice rested her head, something soft touched her cheek. The collar Aoko had given him. Once we get back, you should change and clean up. When you're ready, we can talk in the drawing room. Touko sees me as her enemy now, too. With those words hanging in the air, they reached the top of the hill. The gate in the woods stood before them. Beyond it, illuminated by the pale moonlight, stood the mansion. Looking up at it, the girl felt a little disappointed. A natural reaction, yet she could not place where her sadness was coming from.
Once they entered the mansion, Alice slid off Sojuro's back and walked toward the West Wing. The West Wing was her domain. However, after only a few steps, she collapsed to the floor. Alice! Sojuro rushed over to her, but she raised her hand. Her gesture told him he was not to come closer. He stopped in his tracks, a concerned look on his face. Her pale skin gleamed with sweat, her expression uncharacteristically strained. I'm fine. I can make it to my room on my own. Stay here. I'm going to mend my clothes. I'll be back shortly, and then... The pained look in Alice's eyes told Sojuro they would talk later. He knew he could not stop her. Sojuro reminded himself that she was the one in pain, not him. Alright then, tell me everything when you come back. Alice took a deep breath before slowly disappearing down the corridor. An uneventful 5 minutes passed. Alice returned wearing a fresh set of black clothes, but her complexion remained pallid. With a small sigh, she carefully leaned against a pillar in the foyer and slid down it until she was sitting. Alice, if you're in pain, you should lie down. Sojuro sat across from her on the cold floor. I'm not in pain anymore, so I don't need to lie down. I was forced to swallow a Rowan, so my body can't heal completely. At least let me get a blanket for you. No, if I stay here, the cold won't bother me. She seemed to be telling the truth. Sojuro remembered Aoko telling him that as long as Alice is inside the mansion, she would be comfortable. Okay, as long as you're warm. So, what's this Rowan thing? It's a kind of medicinal herb. It gets its name from what's left in the cinders after it's burned 7 times in the stove, and it's used as a ward against spirits. It's not good for regular people, but for me and Aoko, it's worse. Once it's in our bodies, it reacts badly to the production of magical energy, and there's nothing we can do but wait it out. So, it's a poison? No. Like I said, it was originally used in medicine. I'm using magical energy to heal right now, so I'm having to fight it. But once I'm fully healed, I'll be fine, as long as I don't use magecraft. Basically, I won't be of any use until I fully digest it. Alice paused. She decided not to say how many days that would take. Anyway, it's nothing you need to worry about. I can manage the pain. It's just a result of my circulation. She worked hard to keep her tone calm. Aoko had barely blinked when she was struck in the back, so mages must have an unusually high pain threshold. Sojuro was surprised and bewildered by what she said. If wounds didn't count as long as the pain wasn't too bad, then nothing would hurt except an injury that kills you. Fine. Let's talk tomorrow. For now, I want you to rest. I won't be any better then. It doesn't matter. You need to take better care of yourself. He stood up. I'll take you to your room. Or how about the drawing room? I've never been to the West Wing, so I don't know where your room is. I'm fine here. I need to be here when Aoko comes back. Alice looked up at the skylight. The moonlight illuminated her pained face. The foyer looked like it belonged to a rundown castle. Only the moon and Alice seemed more vivid than reality. Where did her strength come from? Sojuro stared at her. Without understanding the significance of Alice's gaze, he turned his gaze to the night sky, powerless as it was. For the third time that night, the silence was broken by the sound of the phone ringing. Before Sojuro could move, a thin shadow bolted across the foyer. By the time he realized it was the weakened Alice, she had already taken the receiver in her hand. Aoko? It was the first time Sojuro had heard Alice sound concerned. Her tone was infinitely graver than when she was enduring her own pain. Alice's question received only a short response from the voice on the other end. It was a voice more frail than Alice's, like a flickering flame about to turn to smoke. Sorry, they got me. The phone was far from Sojuro's ears, but the words he picked up were very unlike her. Despite saying so little, no, because she had said so little, the weight of Aoko's defeat struck Sojuro hard. Alice silently set the receiver down. Only moments before, her body had been fighting the pain. Now it felt stronger than ever. It was like a scarecrow transforming into a beautiful stone statue. Seeing this, Sojuro finally understood. Alice's expression when she looked at the moon had come from her trying to accept an immutable reality.